Welcome. Let's get started, please. Welcome to this Dean Speaker Series. We've had just a terrific group of speakers in recently, and we have a terrific group coming up. Today we have one of our favorite alums and an obviously very, very important leader in today's marketplace. So let me introduce Paul Otellini. Intel Corporation, as most of you know, is headquartered in Santa Clara. It's been a dominant and a really iconic company for American manufacturing generally, but also in semiconductors for 4 decades now. The company's ambitious mission statement reads, "We will create and extend computing technology to connect and enrich the lives of every person on Earth." It's big, it's bold, it's aspirational, and it helps provide a concrete reflection of the importance of this firm in the marketplace and in our lives. Intel is well known for its extraordinary leaders over the years, industry icons that you know, Andy Grove, Craig Barrett. Today's guest speaker, Paul, no exception in this line of great leaders. And they have provided dynamic leadership for Intel's more than 100,000 employees, and that spans more than 120 companies. He's been part of Intel since 1974, part of the Bay Area his whole life. He grew up in San Francisco, received his undergraduate degree at the University of San Francisco. And of course, as most all of us here know, he got his MBA right here at Berkeley-Haas. Paul joined Intel in 1974, as I said. It is the same year he graduated from Haas. He credits his Berkeley MBA with helping him get that first job at Intel. It was a deep recession at the time, 1974. He started in finance, in the finance department. He advanced to manage key components of Intel's business, including PC and server microprocessor division, and global sales and marketing were other roles that he played. He was promoted to president and chief operating officer. That was 2002. He became CEO 7 years ago in 2005. It is a semiconductor company that recorded over $50 billion in net revenue in last fiscal year. That was up some 24% from 2010. Intel has been named one of Fortune's best companies to work for. Paul himself was number 6 in Glassdoor.com's 2012 ranking of the top 25 highest-ranked CEOs with a 93% approval rating from his employees. I did not make that list, if you were wondering. Paul also serves on the board of directors of Google, on the President's Council on Jobs and Competitiveness. He was named our Haas School's Business Leader of the Year, 2006. Remarkable contributions on so many fronts. I'd also like to point out that he and his wife, Sandy, are also a leadership commitment to our new building, which we greatly appreciate. So they are connected to Haas and to Berkeley in so many different ways, personally and as a firm. Intel annually collaborates with our UC Berkeley Lester Center for Entrepreneurship with their Intel Global Challenge. It's a very important program for us. It encourages student entrepreneurs around the world, great many countries. And the central focal point final event is here in Berkeley. It's one of our most important entrepreneurship events of the year. We are so grateful to have people like Paul be part of our school. They are what bring us so much strength, and by going beyond themselves in so many different ways and also coming back to speak to us. We appreciate it very much. Without any further ado, let's please welcome Paul Otellini. Paul, thank you. So it's a pleasure for me as the dean of our school. I didn't introduce myself, Rich Lyons. I think most of you know me, to get a chance to interview Paul. And there's so many questions that I could ask him. One thing we want to make sure that we do is open it up to the floor with Q&A. Because we're doing a video that will be available in our video room, though, we do ask you to use the microphones. That helps make the video work. And we'll open it up for questions in perhaps 20 minutes or something along those lines. Look, there's so many things I want to ask you. Let me start with this question. So people think of the long line of hugely important leaders at Intel, exclusively from engineering, at least as a basis, and your background more in marketing and a bit in finance. Could you talk a little bit about that transition into a CEO that came from a bit of a different background?
Sure. I'm glad you didn't ask me who's going to win the debate tonight. Much harder question. So how did I get here?
Yes.
Well, Intel is a company that is, of course, a strong engineering company. Of the 103,000 people, we have over 40,000 engineers, 5,000 PhDs, 4,000 MBAs, and an assortment of lawyers. And so we're highly technical because of what we do for a living. We're also a company, though, that has a strong and old culture, goes back 40 years plus now, and one that is based on, I think, the essence of Silicon Valley, which is meritocracy. Silicon Valley was always about, and I think still is, when you look at the startup orientation, about what you can do, not where you were or what school you went to or so forth. And it's your capability that matters. And the company has built our culture around that, back to Bob Noyce, who was essentially the founder of the company. I started in finance, but I started out, my first job was programming a cost system on a PDP-10, which predates anyone in this room. I rose through finance, went to marketing early on, sales, around the IBM business, did a good job of that, grew the PC business to our mainstream business, and was in the right place at the right time. Andy gave me a chance to go, Andy Grove gave me a chance to run a product group, which was a high-risk move to go from marketing to running product group, because that was a technical, you had to make technical decisions, but I found at that point in time, you learn by osmosis. I mean, not necessarily how to design circuits, but what these products do. And asking that dumb question, so why would someone want to buy this, is often the most important question. And that's not a technical question. It's about consumer behavior or practicality of use. And then I helped get the 486 and the Pentium going, and the rest was history.
That's great. That's great. And so that question of why would the consumer want this? People were recognizing that their product divisions needed a little bit more of that mindset at that time. Is that fair?
Yeah. I mean, for the early history of the semiconductor industry, and perhaps even today, was about building a better mousetrap. We started out in memories, which is where most of the industry started, and it was simply bigger memories, bigger, faster, denser memory chips, cheaper. That was how Moore's Law got postulated. In computers, it was the same kind of model. When we started building we invented the microprocessor, and then a faster one every couple of years was the mandate. But speeds and feeds, to use the old IBM terminology, isn't what people need anymore, per se. You need other things. You still need performance, but now you need power efficiency. You need better user interfaces. You need speech. You need gestures, contextual recognition. All that stuff requires different kinds of compute technologies and makes computing easier to individuals. The great paradox of computing, I think, is that it takes more and more performance to make the machine simpler. And you see that evidenced in, say, an iPad or the modern user interfaces. And so that's really what we're driving now, which is how will people use machines? How will families use these? And as the market expands from, let me say, mature North America and Western Europe to first-time buyers in emerging markets and in Africa and so forth, you're going to have different characteristics. Their needs are different than what we needed, or certainly what we need today when you buy a machine. So we have anthropologists on the payroll now that live with people and try to figure out what kind of technology can benefit their lives. And that's reflected, I think, in the mission statement that you read earlier.
Yeah, and you had mentioned, or I'd read the notion of design, right? That kind of, that end user interface that people historically had not thought of as a natural one to think about for Intel is very much being thought about.
We were so proud of those clunky, big beige boxes that got faster and faster every year until you saw a Mac.
Yeah.
And you said, how stupid are you? Of course people like design. You want to put this in your house.
Yeah.
And I think that was really the beauty of what Steve brought to the industry, Steve Jobs brought to the industry, was realizing this was a consumer product. And as a consumer product, and you're proud of it, and you carry it around with you, or you display it in your living room. And so the big, boring beige box was dead long before anyone knew it. And now we just have to catch up and make all these machines much more elegant. You can think about integrating into automobiles now. I mean, there's going to be more computing in your car in the next few years than was in your laptop last year.
Yes.
But you're not going to sit there and type commands in. It has to be voice activated. It has to be cognitive. It has to know that hey dummy, you're driving onto an on-ramp of a freeway the wrong way, and stop you before you kill someone. That takes a lot of performance and software.
Absolutely. So we're seeing rather organically on the student front a lot of the same trends here. One of our hottest, very organically grown student clubs is our Design and Innovation Strategy Club. I mean, there's so much interest here in making sure that we as a business school and we as management education more generally, right, that we are delivering into that need. It's clear in your industry and in your role within it, but we see it pretty clearly in industry.
It's come full circle, Rich, I think. If you think back, I mean, you're not as old as I am, but I remember back in the 50s and 60s, it was sort of the design and Art Deco kinds of things and the whole tail fin phenomena of cars. Design became the parameter on which you sold things. And then the technology took over in the 70s and 80s and 90s. And now what's happening is design is once again coming to the forefront because it defines who you are in many ways. Technology, what you carry around in your pocket is as much of who you are today as what's in your wallet.
Wonderful, wonderful. Switching gears a little bit, as you think about the design of your company as an organization, as you think about the values that define it, this mission statement, which you were obviously very important in helping to shape. Could you say a bit about culture as it's obviously a fundamental design element? Do you feel like it's a fundamental driver of competitive advantage for you?
I hope so.
Yeah.
I think that companies can drift as they get big. What we try to make sure is that we have a consistent culture. But the culture can't be frozen. You talked to me earlier about the IBM phraseology that Tom Watson wrote and how Sam Palmisano had to change the words because 1904 language just doesn't cut it anymore. And we didn't have quite that problem, but we had to take what was focused, a culture that was focused around manufacturing the world's most complex machines, and turn it around and say, how can we design something that will help people? That was a fundamental shift that we made in the company over the last decade. And we're not as far as I'd like us to be yet, but we've come a long way. If I look back in our hiring over the last 5-6 years and our acquisitions over that time frame, it's been probably 80% software.
Interesting.
We don't have as many software engineers as hardware engineers, but we're getting close. Yeah. We're like the 3rd or 4th largest software company in the world, as measured by people. And who knew? And it's because the software puts the personality around the products. It makes the graphics better. It makes the user interface better. It makes the operating system more efficient in terms of power, those kinds of things. That was a fundamental change. The hardware engineers who were the old pyramid, the pecking order of our pyramid at Intel was there was the microprocessor architect and everybody else was under him or her. That's no longer quite exactly the way. The people that design the process technology are right up there. The people who turn that chip into something magical when people touch it are right up there. And that changes implicitly the prioritization of the company and the culture. Wonderful. And you have to be, as a leader, you have to be cognizant of that and make sure that you kind of overcompensate for it and recognize those people whose skills you need going forward versus yesterday. And make sure that those are the ones who are rewarded the best and get recognition and become role models for everyone else.
And so how do you do that? If that's a little bit different sort of a person and there's a little different sort of bargain with that talent
part
category.
Of it is, every company has its own reward mechanisms, and we do too. We have all kinds of Intel Achievement Awards, Intel Quality Awards, recognitions, and so forth. And so we have spent a lot of time making sure that those recognize and reflect where we want to be, as opposed to yesterday's benefits. But we also, as a leader, you have to pick these things yourself. It's what you choose to talk about. Yeah. So when I talk to employees every quarter at the earnings call, I'll go out on my way to put out messages that are forward-looking relative to what we need to focus on, where we want to look in the next year, what are the big strategic issues we face. And you do that at multiple levels in the organization. We do it, obviously, the management team. We do it for the top 100 in terms of our annual strategic long-range plan sessions. We now have the top 800 come together in a leadership session every year to drive that home, and then it filters on down.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. And as you, so culture setting is such an important part of your leadership role, but there are many, many different parts. Going more into the leadership category, as you think about, you mentioned these different roles in marketing and finance and operational and so forth. As a leader, were there certain absolutely pivotal transitions that when you reflect back and you think, well, that one was crucial, and it was crucial because it taught me this, or help us understand a little bit of that path for your development as a leader?
It's a tough one. The one that comes to mind was the hardest one, which was I became CEO in '05.
Yeah.
And it was pretty clear to me when I took over the job that Intel was not structured for where the industry was going. We still did a good job at server chips and high-end PC chips, but even then it was clear before the iPhone that the world was going to smaller, more mobile devices, that Moore's Law was going to allow you to carry around the supercomputer in your pocket not too far forward. And we weren't organized for that. We weren't thinking that way. Our semiconductor device physics weren't aimed in that direction. Our processor designs weren't aimed there. Our marketing wasn't aimed there. Our design win activities with customers wasn't aimed there. But yet we were incredibly profitable. '05 and '06 were two of our most profitable years up to that point in time. And it was before the financial downturn. Engineers could get 6 jobs the minute they left any company. And I made the decision at the end of '05, early '06, to restructure the company, to get us out of a number of businesses. We were 105,000 people. We took 23,000 out.
Wow.
And changed directions of the company to the direction you have now. And there's a lot of sleepless nights when you're thinking about laying off 23,000 people. And I never will feel good about that, but if there's any consolation, it happened at a point in time when everybody got jobs. Had we waited until 8 and 9 to make those changes, my God, people would have been on the streets. And so the lesson I got out of that was one that I knew in my heart, but had never acted on, which is change when you can, not when you have to.
Interesting.
And we were in a position where we could change and remain highly profitable and afford to carry some extra people as we went through the transition and be able to change the company. And to me, that was the most telling moment of the tough decision I had to make.
Yeah, and it may have felt like you had a window of opportunity early on to make some bigger decisions.
Yeah, and to your culture point, I came to this conclusion, and then you go to your staff, and they say, "Are you nuts? We're making money hand over fist, and we need all these people. Everybody that we have is important.
Yeah.
And why would you want to go into this phone business? And it was a tough time, and Andy Grove gave me a lot of pieces of advice. One of them, when I took over the job, was this company is like a supertanker. And when you turn the wheel on a supertanker or hit stop on a supertanker, 23 miles later, something happens. And we're not quite that bad, but things don't. You're up on that bridge, and you realize that by the time someone in the engine room has gotten the message and the ship actually stops, it's a ways out there.
Yeah.
And what I learned through this process, it was how you enroll your staff and how they enroll their staff, and ultimately how you enroll people. Now, you can never enroll people into a restructuring at large, but you can get them to understand how important it is and why you need to go through it.
The why. One other element that I think for our students comes up all the time that's around leadership is the notion of a more global or international capability, right? And so maybe this question is about advice that you would give them. I've heard CEOs say, and I presume you have the same mind, that basically you cannot aspire to jobs at these levels unless you have deep experience in multiple geographies. Do you feel the same way about leadership development at Intel?
I don't know if it's a prerequisite. It's certainly an adder, and it's something that I would look for in a promotional candidate, and it's something that when I started in the company, the overseas opportunities were limited. Do you want to go work in an assembly factory in Malaysia? Probably not.
Very different.
But now we have microcosms of Intel everywhere on Earth, 128 countries. So I tell people in their career, instead of just moving laterally from finance to marketing or from marketing to sales or whatever it's going to be, to also move geographically and do it before you really have a lot of family connections, because it's a lot easier to do that when you don't have those 3 kids to bring to Beijing.
Absolutely.
I think though that in terms of our particular product, we're going to find that the products will ultimately be less and less global and more tailored for geographies. I never thought that until a few years ago, but you can see that there's different models. For example, I don't think you'll ever see large-scale personal computing in Africa. It's unlikely. Africa will grow up with one of the best wireless networks in the world because they don't have to deal with the wireline legacy. They're probably going to start out with their first computer as a smartphone. Yeah. And it's very likely that most of Africa will live on increasingly smart smartphones and tablets or some kind of hybrid device over time. And the personal computer revolution may not ever have to go there. They can still get almost done with it. So that's done what they need to do. And I'm not sure that's going to be the same in, say, Wall Street, where you need those big computing capabilities. So I see us having to then have feet on the street, design capabilities and target marketing capabilities, more semi-custom product kinds of things in countries when we used to be able to do one size fits all.
Interesting. Very different pattern of organization internationally. And so one thing, changing topic a bit, and then we'll start turning to questions, so be thinking about your questions, please. I heard you use a phrase the last time we were together, and you talked about speaking with data, right? This idea of kind of the meritocracy of ideas, right? Yeah. You used the word meritocracy earlier to think about how, sort of people selection within the firm. Could you talk about sort of speaking with data and how that plays out in decision making?
Well, that phrase comes out of what we do for a living. We, as I said earlier, we build the most complicated complex machines that humans have ever designed. And they have to work. Every transistor on a 4 billion transistor chip has to work right. And 3.99995 doesn't work. And our business is inherently high risk. I don't think people see it quite that way, but one of the ways I describe the company is that in terms of what we do, we dig a really big hole in the ground. We spend 3 years and $5.5 billion putting a factory into that hole. That factory will have to, when it comes up, will have to run a technology that isn't yet developed for products that haven't been designed for markets that don't exist. And you do that 2 or 3 times a year. That's our business. So it's inherently a high-risk business. So when somebody speaks with opinion, in the context of making those decisions, I'll listen to their opinion, but it sure is better to listen to data. Yeah. And at the end of the day, sometimes you make gut calls. That's why you get the big bucks. But it's important that you have a culture that speaks first with data. Here's the data. Let's look at the data first. You may end up deciding that it's not valid for whatever reason, but that is so critical in an engineering-oriented company.
And that's one of the things, as we think about our own management education and making sure that students have some sense for the data and where they come from. We had an earlier conversation.
What's the old axiom? When I want your opinion, I'll ask for it.
Yeah. And this idea, I remember we were talking a little bit about how do we get people thinking about experimental design. So the notion isn't, do I have the data or don't I have the data, but how would I design an experiment to get the data? Yeah. And one of our faculty members quipped, that's really transforming students from data consumers to data producers, getting them to think in a really serious way about how the decision-relevant data comes about and how to produce that.
That's the essence of what's kept Moore's Law alive for 40-some-odd years. Is that it's not a law of physics. It's a law that reflects human innovation and ingenuity.
Great point.
And so we recently redesigned the transistor for the first time in 30 years. And if you think about transistors, it's about making things smaller. So you can shrink things in the XY axes until some point in time when you can no longer do that. It's just too small. You're dealing with wavelength of light kinds of problems. So how do you make things denser? How do you get more capability when you can't shrink X, Y? You go vertical. So we invented a transistor that was three-dimensional, essentially. And that invention took us 10 years of several thousand PhDs experimenting and figuring this out and so forth. Now we're in high-volume production now for a couple of years on it. That gives us an advantage in manufacturing, in performance, in cost, in power, that no one on Earth is going to have for several years, maybe 5. And by then we'll be on the next big thing. And so as long as you can use these inventions to extend your lead, and you have the economics of scale coming at you, because that $5 billion factory is going to be $10 billion by 2018.
Absolutely.
Very few people can keep up with this.
Yes. Maybe the right way to phrase this question is where will the industry be in 5 years? But if you could sketch what the next big thing is looking like without giving away any secrets, what?
Well, I think there's two elements of the industry, you know, and being a chip guy, I tend to think about things from the transistor, and it is very clear that there's going to be a consolidation in our industry. There's been a consolidation over the course of the industries. You know, it used to be every company would design a chip and build a factory, and the factory would be tuned to build that chip, and then people were able to reduce the recipes to things that were consistent, and that the industry went along that way for 20 years. At the levels of expense and smallness that we're dealing with now, you're dealing with, it's not money anymore, it's invention. And you're likely to see only 2 or 3 companies cross this chasm in the next 5, 6 years. We'll be one of them. Samsung will certainly be one of them. Beyond that, it's not clear. It's not clear. So then you say, okay, if there's only 2 or 3 companies that can build state-of-the-art transistors, what can be built on them, and who's going to build those chips? And so that changes the dynamics of the industry. Apple today, as wonderful as Apple is, they use Intel chips for their PCs, for their Macs, and they design their own for their phones and tablets. They run them at Samsung. Last time I looked, Samsung and Apple were kind of suing each other, and they're mortal enemies, and Apple gives Samsung about $10 billion a year of revenue, feeding its enemy. So at some point in time, somebody's going to wake up and say, wait a minute, is this right? Or Samsung's going to say, you know what, I really do want to beat you. And I think as those dynamics play out in the industry, you'll see new power structures evolve, new alliances evolve. Without ending up on the next big thing, the next big thing is going to be built on Intel transistors, in my mind, because we'll have that lead that no one else can have in order to manifest what they put onto a chip.
Wonderful, wonderful thoughts. And I know there are a lot of great thoughts out there. So if you have a question, let's get it in the mix. I've got several more, but I do want to open it up and keep this as flowing as possible. So there's a microphone right up here. There's one down here. If anybody would like to jump up to the microphone, go for it. Looks like we have one up there. Great. Thank you, sir.
Hi. Intel has always been a very strong brand, at least through my entire life. Right now, how can Intel retain that strong brand in a world where less and less people actually know and care about what's inside a computer or mobile device? Well,
it's a great question. Nobody knew or what was inside their computer until we told them. So that's the testimony to the power of advertising. And you know, that is still a relevant metric in PC space or in enterprise space or server space. People look for that Intel product in terms of quality and capability. You're right, it's not quite the same in phones and tablets, because who cares? My view is that people will care if we do a good job of designing our products and telling people what's inside it. So, for example, on our first 6 phones that have come out now, smartphones, none of which are available in the US, by the way, so you haven't seen these. There's an Intel brand on the back. It says Intel inside. And when people go to, the first experiments have been in England with Vodafone, with Orange rather, and in France with Orange, people will look at that brand and implicitly say it's a higher quality phone. And we've done exit studies and so forth. Or it's faster, or what does this mean to me? It's going to have higher performance, higher capability. So you can, I think, brand these inanimate objects if the product that you're branding does reflect a difference in terms of its capability. And so we're just beginning to work on our branding for tablets and phones. But my expectation there is that over time, we'll be able to establish a similar affinity. Oh, Carl.
Carl Shapiro. Yeah.
Hi there.
I know. How are you?
You've described how Intel's become more involved with the design elements. But of course, a lot of your customers are the ones who are making the products that consumers are seeing. This relates to the question we just had in a way. How has that affected your relationship with your major customers? Since you're doing design, they're doing design, how has that affected how you work together?
It's a great question. Well, the reality is that Apple still has a very high R&D budget. Well, actually, it's a small R&D as a percent of sales, but in terms of the industrial design part of it, it's very high. But the PC guys don't spend a lot of money on design. And what we're finding is that the cycle time for changeover of phones and tablets and PCs is such that unless we are able to do reference designs that are essentially fully functional, that are turnkey that you can give to people, where they put their own skin on them, so we can still have a XYZ company's look and feel, that they can't keep up with the rate of change. But yeah, we can. So we're finding ourselves much more in the industrial design side, in the software side for that reason, because it accelerates the time to market and the competitive. And the other way to look at it too is even if you are still in that business, and many of our customers are, you don't have enough money to hit every product type and every price point in every country in the world. We can help fill in those gaps. So I see it less of a, it certainly is not focused at competing with them. We don't intend to sell branded systems against them. That is not our style. And in general, they seem to like it because it helps augment their R&D. And they can add their own value on top of it. You know, at this essence, you'll, of all people in this room, would appreciate this, given your background. When the integrated circuit was invented, Bob Noyce, the inventor of it, told me that the flip-flop designers, the discrete circuits, all thought they were going to be put out of business. And in fact, they were, right? And our whole premise as a business is innovate and integrate. And whenever we integrate more, hence Moore's law, more onto a chip via Moore's law, someone is getting displaced. And the people that have been successful in the industry are those that ride Moore's law versus fighting it and stay on top and innovate on top of what can be done. And that's what we're seeing now as the industry goes through this inflection.
Thank you.
Thanks. Just for everybody else in the room, Carl Shapiro is just back from the Council of Economic Advisors, teaching our core micro in our full-time MBA program, and in the past had worked as a chief economist at the Department of Justice as well. Thanks, Carl, for that question. Please.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for coming. It's very inspirational to see where, as a Haas MBA, we can actually go to. And I would like to know what actually from the MBA was one of the main takeaways for you, what actually was something you took with you into your career and that you would also recommend us to really focus on during our MBA.
Yeah, you know, it's been 38 years. Haas didn't use much case study methodology in my day. It was more the Chicago school. So it was very quantitative, which helped a lot going into an engineering company. And it gave me a really good base in mathematics, a better base in mathematics than I had coming out of college. So that was a big plus. The other one was much more personal. There was a teacher here when I was here named Louis Lundborg. And Louis had just retired as the chairman of the board of the B of A, Bank of America. And he was teaching at the Berkeley Business School. It wasn't Haas then. Louis was one of these guys, self-made man, who ended up being, incredibly successful. And he mentored me. Somehow he took a liking to me, and said you can sort of be a lot more than you're thinking. And he gave me an aspirational view that I didn't have coming out of college, and certainly didn't really have until I got out of here. And that it led me to aim higher and look for something a little bit more exciting. To his great chagrin, he wanted me to go to work for the Bank of America. I didn't go there. I went to Intel, as it turned out, and we talked about that after I graduated and been at Intel for a few years, and he said, "You chose the right company." But it's interesting. I hadn't thought about this in years, but it's really those two elements that are very important to me in terms of what I took away. And everything else is more of just the problem-solving methodology that you come out, and anyone gets out of business school is very good groundwork. But those are the two that distinguish it.
That's wonderful. It's a wonderful personal story. Thanks for that question too. It's linking that to this transition as you moved from finance to a marketing role within the company, and could you talk a little bit about that specifically? Obviously, there was a need and an opportunity.
The move was actually from finance to sales, which was even worse. You went from counting the beans to trying to sell the beans, and that was cultural shock.
Okay.
And I'd done retail sales before during college, but nothing like calling on IBM and trying to say, you know what, this thing called the microprocessor is pretty cool. You might want to think about using it. Because IBM was our biggest customer. They were a memory company, but the PC hadn't been invented yet. And that was a real fun learning experience. And what I learned in sales is that you have to like being said no to a lot.
Yeah.
And once you get over that, hey, it's not personal, and you go back in and you find a different vector to sell on, then it works.
Yeah, well, the faculty say no to me all the time, so I'm getting very, very, very good at this.
You could move to finance.
I think I could make the alternate transition. We have another question here. Please go ahead, sir.
Thanks. Hi, I just wanted to ask a bit about what you see as the big sustainability challenges in your business, because there's certainly talk about issues like water in Arizona and energy efficiency and so forth. How do you see that playing out?
For the semiconductor industry?
Yeah, well, and Intel's business in general.
Yeah. Well, our goal is essentially 100% reclaim and recycle in our factories. Semiconductor factories are just basically big chemical factories at the end of the day. And so we're getting close to having all the chemicals recycled and therefore reused back into which is a great cost savings. We are not yet at the recycle all the water, although all the water we use is cleaned and put back into the aquifers in New Mexico and Arizona. So it actually gets put back into the aquifer cleaner than it comes out of the tap at Chandler. But the next step is, why even bother, why not just fill the factory once with water and reuse it all the time? And that's where we're going to next. I just had a conversation with Bob Hormats at Department of State this morning, who's very interested in conflict minerals. So where do we get the stuff that goes into our packaging? Lots of tin, molybdenum, lead. We're not using lead anymore. And we have now put in place a process to identify the source of conflict minerals and not buy it, and trace it from good sources to bad. And the State Department actually wants to make this a best-known method for the industry.
Wow.
And we're likely to be able to say in January that we've now built the world's first conflict mineral-free microprocessor. And those kinds of things are important to us, and they're important to consumers, obviously. And those are the sort of the infrastructural challenges that we face. Is that the heart of your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Could I continue with that line? So how does that bubble up within Intel? How did you get there? Did some employees basically pitch you on a project and say, hey, we could do this? Or I'm wondering.
No. And I'm glad to say that they didn't. It bubbled up because we've got, our culture and our governance and corporate citizenship are, I think, second to none. And these are just things we do. And one of the earliest values of the company that Bob articulated was be an asset to the communities in which you operate. Well, if you're going to pollute your own backyard, that's not a very good asset. So we have taken this seriously from day zero. And as the technology allows us to do it better, you can actually undertake more. So in the Southwest, we put on solar panels on all the factories to basically provide all the hot water. Now we're covering the parking lots with solar so that you offset the grid use and so forth. And it's smart business, and it actually makes economic sense most of the time.
It's a nice story. It's a nice element. We have a question here, please.
Hi. Can you talk a bit more about how Intel plans to attract and retain top talent, particularly given the tension between 103,000 people and a fast-moving meritocracy, and then given the backdrop of Silicon Valley and companies like Google and Facebook generally being competitors for that top talent?
Yeah. Well, I'm the chair of the comp committee at Google, so I see real data there, and I see they have the data from Facebook and so forth. I also see what they pay people, which is a lot, by the way. Their market comp philosophy is 95th percentile, which is pretty high. We have almost zero trouble attracting and retaining people on the hardware side of our business. I mean, if you're a semiconductor device physicist coming out of school, where else in the world do you want to work? I mean, we're like Mecca, or NASA to the space aerospace engineers. It's the coolest place on Earth with the biggest budgets, doing the best things. So that side of the business, the people that run our factories and design our silicon technologies, no problemo. Same in microprocessor architecture or circuit design, pretty much the same. And the retention rates and the attrition rates of we look at undesired turnover. There's some people wouldn't mind leaving. There's some people you want to keep. You want to keep most people. Our attrition rates are low single digits, which is lowest in the industry. The place where there is much more competition is software. And I said earlier, about half the hires we've hired recently have been software, because that's where, I don't have a lot of semiconductor factory competition in the United States, but there's an awful lot of people that want software engineers. So there we have to bid for the best and the brightest against Facebook, against Google, and so forth. And part of it is where do you live? The Facebook, Google model for the most part is in Mountain View. And some people would like to live in Oregon or Arizona or maybe in China or India. And so we have a footprint that's, I think, more broad and more tolerant for that than the big software company models, where they tend to be centralized, starting with Microsoft. And they have branches elsewhere, but if you're not at the corporate headquarters of these three companies, you're really not in the heat of things. So we can offer them that capability if they don't want to necessarily have to have the same lifestyle of driving down 101 every day to Silicon Valley. It's not been a problem, though.
Great. We have a couple more here and here. We'll take those two. I think you were first. And then I also want to ask you a quick question about competitiveness, just sort of because that's something you've thought and written a lot about. I'd love to get your thoughts. Please.
So yeah, thanks again for coming. It's really great to see you in person. So the question I have is largely about culture. It's something that we really value here. And what I'm curious about, you talk about how big the company is, how many countries you're in. As the head, how can you check what's actually going on the ground? How often do you have the chance to go out and see the workers themselves? It's one of the things in our problem-finding, problem-solving class that we talk about, going out and just observing. How often do you have that chance?
Well, I can't say I touch 103,000 people every year. But we've long had a history of open and transparent communications. Anyone in the company can send me a note, and I will answer it personally. Email. I don't have anyone filtering my email. Anuj, my assistant here, knows that. I do all these things myself. And so if an employee says, I have a gripe, I have a good news, I have bad news, I need help, I need, your medical plan sucks, I deal with it. I'm the first one to deal with it, and there's someone will take action on it. So that transparency is very important as a culture, to be able to say, you have something on your mind, send me a note. We have open forums all the time. I traveled up to I was in Malaysia last week celebrating our 40th anniversary, and it was you meet with employees, auditoriums like this. What do you want to talk about? No agenda. It's their questions and answers. Same thing in China. And then lastly, and I think perhaps most importantly, we try to use our own technology. So we're very active, and not just me, but my whole staff on webcasts. And they're not one-way webcasts. These are all, the Q&A back and forth, mostly video, sometimes textual, and just keep that open dialogue there. I told Rich earlier, we also, in terms of taking the pulse of the organization, we have an annual organization health survey. All 103,000 people have a chance to speak their mind. We've been doing it for 20 years, asking the same kinds of questions, so you have a great database. It's voluntary, it's anonymous. All we want to know is, kind of where do you work, so we can cut things in certain ways. And whenever we see problems, we as a leadership team say, okay, next year we're going to go work on these 3 things. And the next survey comes out, and if you haven't showed progress on it, you go work on it again. And we tell the employees at large, these are the things, this is what you told us. You said we're not so good here. We're going to go focus on these. We'll see, and we'll ask you a year from now how we're doing. So it's not a real time, but it's a very good litmus test on feedback all the way down in the organization.
It's great. It's great. It's something we were talking a little bit earlier about the Culture Cal process here on the Berkeley campus. For those of you that know, it's an online forum for the whole community, a specific purpose. And I can vouch for Paul's email responsiveness. He is so much more responsive than I am. I need to raise my game. We have one more up here, and then I think I'm going to ask the competitiveness question, and then I think that's going to be it. So please, sir, go ahead.
Sure. So it's just one more question on culture, actually.
A little closer to the mic.
Sure. Another question on culture. So Intel is well known for this idea of constructive confrontation, and especially in a world where you have so many potential directions you can go, kind of honing in on different areas, it allows for a really respectful discourse. I'm just curious to know, how has that culture changed or evolved since you...
Oh, it's changed a lot. And part of it is the workforce has changed a lot. And the things that were tolerable in 1974 when I went there are no longer tolerable for a whole bunch of reasons. Profanity, just crudeness, demeaning behavior. That's the dumbest blanking idea I've ever heard in my life, kind of thing. That was pretty common in the industry and in our company in 38 years ago. You don't see that today. So if anything, we're a little too polite right now, and we're trying to put a little bit more of the constructive back into the confrontation, so that people put a little more confrontation back into the dialogue, so that there is a little tension there, because I think it's taken a little out of it. And that's good, because it's important to have those points raised, but it's more important to have the second axiom, which people don't talk about, which is, okay, disagree and commit. I heard you. Thanks very much for your input. It was actually a very good idea, and we thought about it, but we're going to go over here. And at that point in time, we expect employees to say, okay, got it, boss. You listened to me, and we're moving on. Constructive confrontation without that part to close it, where the employee knows they've been listened to and it was thought about, is a real problem. And without doing that, you lose the ability to have people tell you what's wrong from the bottom up.
Thanks.
Thank you for that, and thanks for that question. So let's conclude on a big picture topic, and we're not going to talk about the debate tonight, but that's obviously what's on a lot of people's minds. But let's focus on U.S. competitiveness, something that you've thought deeply about, something that Intel is very much invested in, and so forth.
And for Obama for you.
And as you're right, chairing that Council on Competitiveness. So as you think about kind of the 2 or 3 things that look, if you were a candidate and you were in the and you were in the debate tonight, what are the 2 or 3 competitiveness suggestions you would make?
Well, let me give you a preamble. I think, I travel the world a lot on my job, and all of the forces that were truly driving a lot of outsourcing in this country to other places, like low-cost labor, like low-cost materials, transit differences, and so forth, are being negated at light speed. A engineer with 3-4 years experience in China that works for us today, or India for that matter, cost as much as an engineer that works for us in Santa Clara. And if you go a couple layers higher than that to first and second line managers, they cost more. Why? Because people with English skills, solid engineering background, resume credentials at an Intel or a Microsoft or whomever are in high demand in an environment where there's high wage inflation anyway. So in the technology arena, engineering arena, wages are no longer the driver. Energy costs are going up faster offshore than onshore. You've got political risks, you have intellectual property risks, and so forth. So I think that if I were running tonight, what I'd be telling people was, forget talking about outsourcing. Let's talk about how we bring the world's capital back to the United States to put it to work here and lower the impediments of people operating and building factories here that will manufacture for the world here the way we did for 30, 40 years. That was far-fetched even 5 years ago. The scenarios are unfolding, and you can see this playing out real time with China to allow us to be able to do that. So what do you need to do? Back to your original question. You need to have a competitive tax rate. Get rid of the loopholes so you're revenue neutral, but make it a world-class competitive tax rate that brings capital back. Corporate tax rate. You need to have permitting processes that allow for expediency of factories. You need to have job training for people and encourage kids to go get engineering degrees and those kinds of things. But you can start bringing these things back on an economic basis, I think, harbored by the umbrella of the security of operating in this country. You're not going to get your factory expropriated here. There's a lot of places on earth where that may happen. You know, it is still the second largest market for everything in the world. The economy is still, as weak as it is right now, the dollar is still the reserve currency of the world. So you go through all this list of things and you say, my God, we're under-aiming in terms of trying to restore our competitiveness. It's not just bring back that steel job in Ohio. It's about having Siemens and Huawei and Telefonica and every company in the world invest here.
Great point.
And you can do that if we get our act together.
Great point.
And that's what drives jobs.
It's much bigger than just companies that are associated with the U.S., whether they're domiciled here or not. Look, these sorts of events are a pleasure for me. They're a pleasure for our whole community. Before we started here, I was able to introduce Paul to our Nobel Prize winner, Ollie Williamson, who's here in the front seat, Carl Shapiro's questions, the students' questions. Paul, you're every bit a part of this community. We welcome you back. We want to see you back here often, and we appreciate your taking so much time with us. Thank you.
Go Bears beat Stanford.